bodies have often been thrown down wells or burned or whatever, and so it's impossible to have an accurate count, but the best estimates that I know of are close to 500,000 people have been killed.
It is genocide by all means. According to the definition, it is genocide by all means, because the government wants to extinct part or whole the indigenous people.
I'm very committed to social justice and to peaceful conflict resolution. And the reason for my interest in Darfur is, of course, that that's one of the areas where there's most serious conflict and where there has been most terrible slaughter in the last decade.
Most of us know very little about Darfur, a region of Sudan, the biggest country in Africa. Sudan is located just south of Egypt. Darfur is made up of the 3 regions in Western Sudan. They border Libya, Chad, and the Central African Republic. Abdul Hadi Matar has a young family in Melbourne, Australia, after fleeing persecution in Darfur 10 years ago.
Good boy.
He's a highly qualified high school teacher, but now makes do working as a security guard. Abdul Hadi's wife Zara is a doctor who also fled in fear of her life.
You doing what? Homework. Homework? Which homework? This one. My book bag's there. My book is in the bag.
My village was burned down. Many people were killed, and some fled to neighboring country, Chad, and some were imprisoned like me.
I have some problem with the government because all the Darfuri doctors, they send them to work in the war zone area, and they asked me to go to work over there, and I refuse. So I have 2 choices. Either I have to flee for our safety, for my safety, or I have to go to the jail. So that's why I just left Sudan. Yeah.
It's not like here. Here, the prison in the Western country, like an hotel, compared to our prisons there. We don't have the basics. You don't have even a mattress to sleep on. You just sleep on the ground, you know. We don't have basics, food. Just the rations could be once a day or twice. We don't have sanitation or clear water. It was very, very, humiliating prison compared to nowadays prison.
I remember one day while we went for the vaccination in one market, the militia come and attack the market. So we have to flee for our life. So that is very difficult situation, and there's a lot of people died. So it's really very bad situation. Yeah.
I was handcuffed, and from my legs, suspended on the seal. And at night, at that time it was winter, they, pour cold water. It was very, very painful, They use all kind of torture. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello. Alpha Lasimba is the Community Engagement Officer at the Darfur Australian Network, a community-based advocacy organisation. He's meeting other Darfuri community leaders in the network's Melbourne office. They are meeting before attending a human rights advocacy workshop.
لأنه برد على تليفوناتهم مبارك اسمه يا راجل آدم محمد جاكوب لا قالوا كلموا يجي
هو قال برد حسب بمزاجاته
أو شرق والله
خلاص دي خريطة دارفور احنا فصلنا خلاص ولا شنو؟ والحين لو فصلت تجيب لنا جزء من الشمالية ذات ولا انت عارف الخريطة دي ما مكتملة الموضوع واضح لك ما يكون في نور دارفور أكبر من كده
هنا بس يعني الجزء اي
والله شيلوا معك
ما كده مش ده نحن هو ده شالوه
يلا دار يوم ثاني كمان
ده الدول الشمالي
يلا يا 129 35 129
اوكي let's go
Let's go.
باي توني
هاي و 87
In 1956, when Sudan became independent, the entire government of Sudan went to the Arabs who actually live in northern Sudan. And the Arabs adopted the policy of neglecting Darfur, continuously committing human rights violations against the Darfurians and not actually giving the Darfuris an opportunity to participate in the central government in Khartoum.
Well, the conflict has been centrally between the Darfur people and the central government of the Sudan. The central government has never contributed much to development of the area. There was great resentment in Darfur about the central government, and the people there were protesting about that, really.
The conflict in Darfur began in 2003 when two rebel groups, Justice and Equality Movement and Sudan Liberation Army, which were the Sudan Liberation Front, they jointly attacked the government facilities in northern Darfur, accusing the government of violating the human rights, of marginalizing the region, of actually not developing the region.
In order to repress that protest, the central government has armed militia groups called the Janjaweed, Arab groups who've come in and committed the most terrible atrocities, driven people off their land. Anywhere up to 500,000 people have been killed.
And the Janjaweed are the ones who actually do extra work for the government. They are the areas where the government do not want to get involved, so they give Janjaweed weapons, they give Janjaweed money to go and attack the villages. They're doing so. This is working, Janjaweed working side by side with the Sudanese government. But the end goal of that is actually to get rid of a key tribes of Darfur, which is Masalit, Zagawa, and Fo.
The recent conflict in Darfur has been categorised as one of the biggest humanitarian crises that the world has ever faced. 1.5 million people are living in refugee camps, and up to 4 million people are entirely dependent on humanitarian aid from the outside world.
Darfur has become the biggest refugee camp in history. A land is the size of France has turned to be a camp. Just imagine.
The population of Darfur is between 6 and 7 million people. The United Nations says more than 2 out of 3 Darfuris are directly affected by the war, and nearly half the population are internal refugees. This is why the UN has described Darfur as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. More and more people are fleeing the country in fear for their lives.
This war, it affects all the families because now the men, they just live in the forest or with rebel groups, but the women and children have been in the camps, so the responsibility of the women, they need to look after their children, they need to provide everything, the basic things for their lives. So it's really very difficult for them to get the money, to prepare the food, to even to prepare to go outside to collect the firewood. And when they go out to collect the firewood, so the militia may come and kill them or may rape them. So it's really very hard time, very difficult situation over there.
I was 3 months in jail. I was just released without being brought to court. And I knew that they would arrest me again. So the best thing is to flee for my life. I used camels through the desert and traveled to Libya.
Back in Darfur, Mohammed Idris was a vet, farmer and political leader. He and his wife started a new family in Australia after running for their lives 8 years ago. Mohammed Idris now works as a security guard.
At the time, the government came to arrest me in my pharmacy, and one of my friends came and joined me and asked me to leave the area immediately, and that was why I escaped from my farm up to the other village around the Kapkabia and escaped to the capital city of Khartoum.
Friends and family. We are happy here. Look at us here. And you know what? Take a look at all people over there. People over there, this is what they need, you know? This is what they would like to have. So try to look at us. And you know, we had a good life here, the best quality of life. And we would just wish for them to have so. And if you can do so, please help. My mom was like the only parent that she had to take care of 5 kids. And I was the oldest, and I was 12 years old, and I still have to hold my mom around. So my mom, because she works, she makes things, she sells at the shops, and then she comes back home, and we go to school and everything. And my dad was in Egypt for a year and a half. So it became really difficult for my mom because she has to work so hard.
When I saw the victims of violence in Darfur, people burnt in their village, and our farms being burnt pre-harvest stage, and government is not protecting us.
I left Darfur in 1999 because the government of Sudan attacked my village, killing the entire villages, and I was forced to walk almost about 100 km towards Central African Republic, and became refugee, and then from the refugee came to Egypt, and from Egypt came to Australia.
We saw the villages that were burned down, the houses that were burned down. There was still fire, there was still thing. And people, the place was really close to us, and everyone was just dying. You just walking past and you can see someone just getting shot or something. People were sick and everything. It was sad to leave Darfur because I'm just, you know, it's just that I was just born there and I was grow up there, so I know everything that goes there, and all my friends and school, everything.
Here is my little baby brother, and there's the picture I took of the water coming out of the pipe, and that's the wheel that I took because it looks cool.
She's not scared of a camera, is she?
No, she is not.
Oh, thank you very much. If you've got your 5, just lay them out on the table so we can see them all. Oh, come on, lay them out again. We'll bring this around. Crop that little bit out at the bottom, just so we're not...
And I do love photography. I take photos every time, almost every single day. And so I said, yes, I would love to do that. And we went with a lot of kids, a lot of family, different families, and we enjoyed too. It was great. Yep. I would love to see peace for Darfur. Darfur was once a peaceful country, and now it's horrific. Like a lot of war happened to it. But once I would love to see peace in Darfur once again. Yes.
And now we are doing this exhibition to raise awareness still, because the Darfur issue is not addressed as it was supposed to be.
This image shows how far I came and the suffering that I went through, and also educate the Australian people about my background and my basic history, and that helps the white Australian community to understand me and me to understand them, and that is possibly a better way for integration into white Australian community.
Community events like this picnic are often held by the Darfur Australian network in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. The Darfuri Sudanese community in Australia numbers up to 1,000 people. Most of the Darfuri community arrived in Australia as refugees through the humanitarian program. And many arrived in Australia after long and arduous journeys through a maze of countries like Egypt and Ghana.
When I arrive here in Australia, I feel like I've been welcomed by everyone, and everyone in the street, they say hello to you. Even they don't know me, but they just say hello. And this is really very good thing.
Darfur Australian Network was set up in May 2006 by a group of concerned Australian volunteers as well as members from the Darfur community here in Melbourne. And it was set up to advocate about the crisis in Darfur and to give the Darfuri community that resides here in Melbourne a voice.
Coming from Africa, coming from Sudan, where the life is slightly different from here, as a new person in Australia, I have to face the question of integration, how to actually use to the life that is here in Australia, and how to forget about the suffering that I went through.
Working with the Darfur community in Australia, in Melbourne and Sydney, is an incredibly rewarding experience. They do face some difficulties in terms of there is a language barrier, and also in accessing services and familiarity with, you know, the Australian way of life.
Yeah. So I took this. So basically, all of a sudden it starts to happen, and you see your family, some of your families or family relatives dying because of that issue. So it's pretty hard to see that. I can imagine to them, you know, because some people lost their parents, lost their families, and kids like just left alone. So me, I'm like, thank God on my families, you know. At least I get to be close to them, I get to be around them.
When Janjaweed planning to attack any village, Sudanese soldiers and police, they start to search the village and arrest everyone who is wise and young people who can protect the village. And when Janjaweed found that that village is empty of people who can protect it, next day they attack the village in the morning when the villagers are sleeping, and they looted everything of value, and after that they set fire on the village and kill everyone who is escaping from the village during the firelight.
Since 2003, the Janjaweed militias and the Sudanese army have been burning villages. In 2005, a United States government satellite study showed that thousands of villages had been damaged or destroyed.
About 5,000 villages were burned down. So the scorched land was the tactics of the Sudanese and its militias.
Since 2003, the Janjaweed actually burned the entire Darfur. So there is no actually villages now erecting in Darfur, and they killed about 400,000 Darfuris. About 4.7 million people were displaced, currently living in refugee camps without food, without clean drinking water, and the situation changes into worse every day.
And genocide literally means an attempt to kill a whole people. The US Congress and the US President called it genocide. A UN Committee of Inquiry studied it carefully and said very serious crimes against humanity have occurred, but they did not call it genocide because there has not been an attempt to kill all the people of Darfur.
It is definitely genocide because the goal of the Sudanese government is to exterminate the key African tribes, Masalit, Zagawa, and Fo. Physically eliminate them, physically destroy them, and that is totally genocide. There is no doubt.
You can't find any reason for why the Sudanese government attacks from time to time or systematically the innocent civilians, burning down their villages and make it impossible for them to come back because they are also destroying, the resources. Water resources were destroyed. Agricultural land were destroyed. So what does it mean? That means it is genocide by all means.
At the beginning of the 21st century, in 2001, a commission of inquiry recommended that the principle of responsibility to protect be adopted. That means that in situations where genocide or crimes against humanity or ethnic cleansing are occurring, that the other countries have a responsibility to ensure that those people are protected. And that principle has been debated at the UN. It was adopted unanimously at a global summit in September 2005, and in theory it should now apply.
Sudan is a rich resource country. There is oil in Darfur, and the part of why the Darfur conflict is becoming very complicated is that the oil plays a key role. The government wants to dominate the areas where the oil is, and then employ more troops in the oil areas and prevent Darfuris from not actually being able to access that areas and make use of the oil.
The problem is that Darfur is not central to the strategic interests of any country other than China, which has an interest in not antagonizing the Sudanese government because of the oil it wants to extract in the Sudan.
The involvement of international community came very late, too late and very slow. The United Nations acknowledged that the crimes in Darfur are taking place. Countries that position themselves in international system as the great powers get involved, but they did very little actually to stop the genocide.
After some years of discussion and some intervention by the African Union of other African countries, there was finally agreement in the Security Council to a very large peacekeeping force of 20,000 people being sent there, made up partly of African peacekeepers and partly from peacekeepers from other countries.
The impact of war in women is really very bad because most of them being raped. So if you be raped, that means socially, and it's really very bad. That means it's like shame for your life. So it's really very difficult situation. So it make you feel like an animal. It's not like a human being.
Many countries were asked to contribute. Australia, shockingly, only contributed initially about 9 people. But in a force of 20,000, that's not our fair share.
The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Darfur. In return, President al-Bashir ordered the expulsion of 13 major international non-government organisations and closed down 3 major national agencies. The decision seriously impacted on the ability of groups like the United Nations and others to deliver much-needed food, water and medical care to millions of people in need.
And also the government has to compensate the refugees whose villages have been burned to come back to their villages, and then they have to find some ways of negotiation to go back to negotiating table to discuss the issues more closely with two sides, the government and rebels, accepting each other's agenda, and then they can work out the solution that works better for the government, for the rebels, and for the people of Darfur.
The solution to the conflict is very simple. It's very simple. Because the Darfur asked for development, asked for basics, and the government doesn't want to give them the basics. In this case, Darfur could have its autonomous role. They can look after themselves, and they can look after their wells instead of just being part of the central government who just wants them to use them as slaves.
I think the international community can do better by supporting the International Criminal Court to bring those who are involved in crimes against humanity in Darfur, to bring them to justice. On top of them, the President of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, the 2 ministers who have been indicted, and the list goes on.
The international community, unfortunately, they haven't done enough. They haven't used their mandate. The responsibility to protect is a big mandate in their hands, but unfortunately they haven't used it. They allowed Rwanda to slip away, and now they have allowed Darfur to slip away again, because they haven't done enough for Rwandans and they haven't done enough for the Darfuris, because the killing is still going on.
Peace is possible in Darfur, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done by the international community, African Union, Sudanese government, and Darfuris themselves.
There needs to be a fully staffed peacekeeping force. There needs to be allocation of much larger aid funds for food. There needs to be a dynamic agricultural extension program.
Peace is possible in Darfur, because if the international community care about us, I think it's possible to have peace in Darfur soon.
Peace is possible in Darfur.
Peace is possible in Darfur.
Danny.
Peace is possible in Darfur.